Well, good morning, everyone. I hope you all are doing well today. It is a joy to worship God together, and it is a joy to start our day off. That How Great Is Our God is one of my absolute favorites. And I always forget about how much I like it until I start singing it, and the peace that I find in there. Before we get into our story today, a couple of announcements. If you did fill out your Connect card, if you want to fold that up and put that in the offering plate when that comes around during the discussion time, then we'll have those. Also, I just want to let you know on November 4th, so in 2 weeks, we are having a turkey dinner here at the church. And we need a few more volunteers to sign up to help in a couple different ways. Otherwise, you can pick up tickets, and if you want to get a couple tickets, invite others, that kind of thing, let me know. I've got some right here, and I can get more as I need them. So last week, we began our series on awkward faith, on the awkward honesty of real faith. Faith that is imperfect, faith that is awkward, that doesn't give in to shame. Last week we talked about David and his undignified, we'll say, and unabashed worship of God. David refused to let another's shame and another person, his wife at the time, enter into his own relationship with God, to get in the way of who he was with God. David's undignified dancing, half naked before everyone, caused him to argue with his wife Michal, who was ashamed of his embarrassing behavior. And it's remarkable how often we, as people of God, let other people or society's sense of what is proper get between us and God. Take, for instance, another character of the Bible, Paul. Paul is a socially unacceptable misfit who just won't stop talking. He's kind of embarrassing. Seriously, he writes so much. He writes so many letters, and that's just the stuff that we have found. You know, most of the New Testament after the Gospels is Paul's writing. Actually, as I was writing this, as I was thinking about Paul, and the more and more I thought about Paul, and as I was cleaning on Friday and listening to music that helps me clean, the musical Hamilton, I get to the song Nonstop. Aaron Burr, if you don't know the musical, it's a modern rap version of the American Revolution. Why not? And so Aaron Burr is singing about his political rival at this point, Adam Hamilton, and he's trying to figure out what makes him tick. And he keeps saying, why do you write like you're running out of time? Write every day and every night like you're running out of time. See, I'm not very good at rapping, though. Sorry. Every day you fight like you're running out of time. He writes on and on and on, and the song is much better at this than I am, but if you read enough of Paul's writings, especially Romans, he's got a similar personality to the Hamilton of Lin-Manuel Miranda's. He just keeps going on and on and on. Our scripture comes from the beginning of the book of Romans, as Paul is introducing himself to the Roman church, people who he doesn't know. And most of the letters are written to people he knows in response to specific situation. But this is kind of like a cold call. This is Prince knocking on your door and saying, "Hey, have you heard about Jesus?" This is Paul's cold call. And so this is from Romans 1, verses 8 through 17. First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is proclaimed throughout the world. For God, whom I serve with my spirit by announcing the gospel of his Son, is my witness that without ceasing I remember you always in my prayers, asking that by God's will I may somehow at last succeed in coming to you. For I am longing to see you so that I may share with you some spiritual gift to strengthen you, or rather so that we may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith, both yours and mine. I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that I have often intended to come to you, but have thus far been prevented, in order that I may reap some harvest among you as I have among the rest of the Gentiles. I am a debtor both to Greeks and to barbarians, both to the wise and to the foolish. Hence my eagerness to proclaim the gospel to you also who are in Rome. For I am not ashamed of the gospel. It is the power of God for salvation to everyone who has faith, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed through faith for faith, as it is written, the one who is righteous will live by faith. Now, the book of Romans is a pretty interesting bit of scripture. It's sometimes referred to as another gospel. It is written, even though it's written as a letter, it starts as a letter. It's less about Jesus' life, who he spoke to, what miracles he did, and more about what it all meant for us. The gospel writers wrote theology. Their meaning into the stories that they were telling. One should simply know, for Paul, one should simply already know the story. And if any story is told, he tells his own over and over again. He shared what Christ meant to him regardless of who did or did not want to hear. He was a notorious talker. And actually, again, the more and more I think about it, the closer the Hamilton and Paul probably were. Now, Paul, at the time of writing Romans, he had a bit more age on him than I think about. You know, the writing, the time of the New Testament. So Paul got his start as a young man, probably just a couple years older than Jesus, and he got his start in the ministry of the gospel just a couple years after Jesus' death and resurrection. And so in his 30s, he becomes this firebrand for the gospel, spreading the word, starting churches, doing all of these things. And by the time we get to the book of Romans, he's a little older. He's in his 50s or so. And he's writing, and it's one of the interesting things about the Bible. Age has never been a qualifier for doing great things. Abraham and Sara are in their 80s, you know. Jeremiah, Mary, Joseph, they're teenagers. Jesus is 30 when his ministry begins. He's 33 when he... Just think about that for those of you in your 30s. It's intimidating a little bit. What all people can do in such a short matter of time. Age doesn't matter. So everyone from 5 to 95 better pay attention to what God's trying to say. But Romans is Paul's writing, not a letter of response to a particular moment, but his kind of opus. The Christians were kind of stuck. They were struggling. It had begun to be a problem to be a Christian in Rome. It's not long until Nero begins the backlash, accuses the Christians of starting the fire, all of the persecutions that began after. The early church started in the midst of struggle and continues. And Paul just won't shut up. Paul won't shut up to the point that in the early church, they weren't really sure if they liked Paul. You know, that if you read through the gospel or the book of Acts, they're trying to decide whether or not Paul is really important. And as the centuries go on, as they're trying to figure out what goes in the Bible and what isn't in the Bible, they still are trying to figure out whether Paul is important. Because, you know, he's not exactly a disciple. He wasn't there. He wasn't talking about the life of Jesus. But these writings were so important to the actual churches that, of course, he became a part of it. The history of what is in and out of the Bible is always a story that we might get to another time. But regardless, Paul is in there, and there's no denying who Paul was for the church. He's known as the great evangelist, mostly, again, because he wouldn't shut up. Anyone, almost anyone, I should say. There are probably evangelists who are introvert, but it is not a common trait. Almost anyone. Hard to get someone who is passionate about something as someone like Paul. It is hard to get them to stop telling you about it. Every conversation goes back to Jesus for Paul. It's someone who isn't intentionally seeking out people to talk to. This isn't someone who's sitting, a natural evangelist is not somebody that's sitting going, okay, I need to speak to a couple people today. I need to remember to connect this to my faith. No, this is someone who immediately, as soon as they are in public, begins starting a conversation because that is what they naturally do. And somehow that always connects to Jesus because they are always thinking about Jesus, and that is always a connection. And that's what a natural evangelist is. And that's who Paul is. Most of us are not natural evangelists. Most of us have to actually get up a little bit of courage and try a little bit. And for me, when I meet people who are natural evangelists, I'm like, this is so awkward. It's weird to talk to people like that. Some people are comfortable with that, and my introvert comes out and I get really uncomfortable, and I'm like, can't we just, talk about the sandwich and not about how Jesus one time made a sandwich into 5,000 sandwiches and this was so cool? But it's important. He sounds like he knows what he wants, and he knows how to get it, and he knows who to talk to, and he doesn't care if you don't want to talk to him. Probably a bit like Prince knocking on doors. Just so engaging that everyone wants to know what's going on. Now, Prince, we would say, would be beyond cool. Prince is kind of the epitome of cool, but at least for me, I'm never cool in that sense. Paul's been known to retell his story of conversion 3 times in a row. In the book of Acts, it is 3 of the exact same story immediately after. Now, of course, the writers of Acts are writing a story of maybe a day's worth or a couple days worth of stories into one chapter, but it is over and over and over again. He didn't find a single person he didn't want to tell about Jesus. The words moderation and embarrassment and shame never crossed his mind until somebody probably said that they should. And soon he's writing again to tell you how much he's not ashamed. He says, "For I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It is the power of God for salvation to everyone who has faith, to the Jew first and also for the Greek. For I am not ashamed of the gospel." Why does it say shame? I had to do a bit of digging for this because I'm reading this and I'm going, I don't think that has to do with shame, more like getting embarrassed and being awkward. I'm trying to calm it down a little bit. Shame to me is something so negative, so deep that it's something I wouldn't ever want to see the light. That's not why I struggle to talk about my faith, is it? Now, was Paul not ashamed of the good news? Of course not. Shame, it's one of those words that probably changes a little bit with definition, with culture. For Paul, shame and honor act as balancing acts that keep their rightful place in life. Having honor and enough shame to keep you honorable. Shame keeps you standing in this understanding of shame and honor. In contrast to how we understand shame, or at least how I understand shame as something to hide away, as something that we hide in the dark and that we let fester. Paul is speaking of having confidence in the gospel itself, not letting something dishonor the gospel, not letting our own fear dishonor ourselves as children of God. All right. So does anyone have anything they'd like to share with the rest of the group? I haven't checked my phone to see if there are any. I'm still getting used to this. You all are getting better at it too. Oh, missing church. Being gone for a little while and coming back and feeling like somebody's gonna judge me. I'm feeling guilty about it and not having a particular reason. It's interesting when a lot of times this happens when I haven't seen somebody for a while and I'll say it. Hey, I haven't seen you for a while. I'm so glad you're back. And, immediately they start telling me excuses as to why they are gone. Like, okay, so here is where I was and here is where I was and here is where I was and please don't tell me I'm a bad person because I've missed church. I think people are afraid that I'm going to immediately start telling them what's wrong with why they were gone. And if I'm real close to you, I might tease you a little bit, but that's about it. Or if you're a teenager, I will definitely tease you for being gone. But sometimes that fear, we talked about that a little bit last week too, that fear of what others will think of us at church keeps us away from church. That fear of something is going on in our life that, we are ashamed of. Well, how often does that keep us from talking to others about it or talking to God about it? I have this secret and that is where I think about, when I think about shame, how has shame gotten in my way of my faith? Well, those things that I'm ashamed of, those sins that I'm ashamed of, they keep me, not only do they keep me from being honest at church, but sometimes they keep me from being honest with God. They keep me from saying, okay, God, I'm so embarrassed. Here I am. I'm a pastor. I am supposed to have this together. And I don't always have it together. And so thankfully we have a gracious God who will forgive. But when that shame overwhelms us, we think that everyone can see that. And we think that gets in our way. Anybody else have anything they'd like to? Okay. So you must be like that person that once said awful things to me. I struggle with that as well. I struggle with, as I was piecing this out, I realized one of the things with shame and Christianity is I'm ashamed of others who use Christianity. And I was trying to figure this out. Was it just when people are trying to sell things using Christ's name, or was it just when they're trying to get power of some sort using Christ's name? And I realized the basic of it was I am ashamed when people use Christ. Not when Christ is the center of someone's life and that means that is the center of all they do. I am ashamed when someone uses Christ. Think about the easy answer or the easy kind of target practice are televangelists, and you have the, Joel Osteen's one of my favorite kicking posts, I'll be honest. Partially because I don't like his theology, but also because I think that, I just don't want to be grouped in with that. That's something that people who have used Christianity to further their own agendas, further their own, in Christianity and politics will make me crazy. And, that's a shame that I struggle with. And so to get from, okay, I'm ashamed of being lumped in with somebody that I think is using Christ badly, to the point where I'm like, okay, no, I'm going to be a good voice for Christ. To get from that shame of others into getting over the embarrassment and the fear of shame to confidence is a struggle. And it's a struggle I deal with on a regular basis, but it's one that I get to, I've contemplated, okay, so it's not really a common thing to do around here, but I've contemplated wearing a clerical collar. As a pastor, I have the ability to collar. Well, what is it like to stand out in public with one of those on? It's kind of a big target. It's either a target for everybody's anger at Christianity, or, well, sometimes it's a target for being a woman as a pastor. Sometimes it's also an opening. A place where people can say, oh, hey, you're a safe person. We have a woman who's been coming by the church for the past couple weeks during the week. And she doesn't speak English, and she doesn't speak a language that is anywhere near anything I could ever learn. She speaks Mongolian. And she comes in, and she's learned enough to be able to tell me a few things, and she shows me pictures of her grandbaby. And we have this conversation, but she was able to connect with the church because she saw the cross on the cell phone tower, and she said, this is a safe place. And so suddenly our kind of beacon that is up there became a safe place for her. And so that shame doesn't need to be there. We can, if we can be something positive for Christ, maybe we can change a little bit more. It turns out you all are smarter than me. You got all the points that I was thinking about. This gospel that we have in this. And even when it's awkward and we're not, chill. Chill's the word I keep going back to. Paul has no chill. Paul is not like cool. I mean, even when Prince was talking, he's, laid back and he's quietly talking about how great God is. And Prince has chill until, you give him a guitar and he goes a little crazy. But Paul has no chill. Paul is bouncing up and down. He's jumping up and down. He's like, I'm so excited about Jesus. And then there's Prince and he's back and he's, yeah, Jesus is a cool guy. I have no chill. When it comes, suddenly when I start to get excited about something, when I've been talking about this service, when I've been talking about connecting to people, when I've been talking about doing all these things, I get really fast and I get really excited and I lose all of my chill. But that passion, learning to not hide that passion, has been a lot of fun this last year. Has been a lot of fun the last few years here at Flame of Faith. And so I hope that you all can, as we go into the world, as we go out as Christians, as followers of Christ, we can maybe lose a little bit of our chill and let our passion show through a little bit. All right. Well, now is the time that we are to go out into the world. Let us go into the world with God's blessing on our hearts, with God's blessing in our minds. Let us go and be God's people in the world. Let us be a voice for Christ that is beyond cool. And let us go in God's peace this day. Amen.